Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Andrew Cockburn. I'm one of the staff chaplains at St. Luke's. I work at St. Luke's Boise, St. Luke's Meridian, St. Luke's Nampa. A little bit of background on me. My beginning in becoming a chaplain was in 2010. My father-in-law at that time, when he was alive, he had quintuple heart bypass surgery. The surgery was 12 hours. I remember going into the room in the ICU in Los Angeles, and something changed in me. I saw him through different lenses that I had seen him before. Instilled in me at that moment was, I need to do everything I can to advocate and be by his side. God was very gracious with me at that time, that I was on furlough in a sense, 3 months off from my work. So every single day during the week for 3 months, all I did was help and support him. And that was my foundation that began instilling in me the desire to help others. The second thing for me that called me to be a chaplain was my wife became disabled in 2011. Multiple hospital admissions. We lived in and out of hospitals at UCLA and Cedars-Sinai. She's never going to get better. She doesn't eat. She has a PICC line. She's had more than 20 PICC line infections. And what an interesting thing about my wife is she became frustrated with me as her husband. And what I mean by that is she started getting frustrated that I wasn't kind or compassionate. So what she did, she prayed to God and go give him some illnesses. Shortly after, I had Bell's palsy, then cancer, and then I have a pacemaker. I have third-degree heart block. It humbled me rather quickly. And my experience now is I see things very differently. And I think this is where the presentation can come in. Prior to studying the works of Diane Langberg, I was unaware that everyone is grieving in some way, shape, or form, because anytime there is a death of a relationship, the death of a job, the death of our identity, we begin to grieve. So that is what the presentation is about. This is a lot of the work that we as chaplains do. We enter the suffering of other human beings at those points in the hospital when they don't know what their future holds. They don't know what their relationships are going to be like. They don't know what their finances are going to be like. They don't know, and there might be role reversals in marriage, especially when one spouse is sick. So for me, I'm a chaplain, I'm a patient, and I'm a caregiver, and that's who I am now. That's who I've become. But for me, it was very hard accepting that this is who I am, that this is how my wife is. And that is because I was grieving. I was grieving over the way things used to be, wanting them to be that way, and having a hard time accepting this is the new normal. So I hope you will enjoy the presentation. I hope if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So this work is taken from the works of Diane Langberg. I would recommend reading her writings if you can. She has 50 years as a trauma, in a sense, a grief psychologist. She is an expert on this subject that I think brings it down to easy to understand language.
Where does she live?
I don't know, somewhere in the United States.
Okay.
But you can find conversations with her on YouTube. So there's more than enough. If you don't want to buy anything, just go online. So I love her definition of pain. Pain is the only protest in the human constitution that something is wrong. It is the only thing that raises its voice against existing abuses. If you jump to silence pain, you will fail to find the wound. Pain is a signal. It indicates danger. Pain is the Martin Luther of the human framework. It plasters the walls of the city with the announcement that something is wrong. When pain exists physically, we call it disease. The absence of pain, as in leprosy, will lead to the destruction of that which is disease. When pain exists emotionally, we call it suffering. The absence of emotional pain is numbness, deadness. It is also the incapacity to feel joy. You cannot do away with the one side of the emotional continuum without eliminating the other. When pain exists in the moral realm, we call it conscience. The absence of moral pain is psychopathy and deadness. Yes, work to alleviate suffering, but do so carefully. Listen to the pain, study it, hear its story. It's one of the ways that you will learn what is wrong or disease in the person you counsel. So I know on your website, you are there to bring awareness to those living with heart disease, to share experiences and challenges. So I hope that this work will allow you to step alongside, come alongside of others where their life is changing and they're going to be grieving and they don't know what the future holds and they might be scared. So I will go to the next page. So on this one, these are the faces of death and trauma. And what most people don't realize, and it was hard for me to realize, they're not a linear process. Sometimes we can be angry, sometimes we can be in denial, sometimes we can have both. We have one hand, I don't want this to be true, but part of us is beginning to accept that this is the new normal, and we cycle back and forth. So anytime we have medical issues, anytime we go through changes where we feel powerless, where we feel helpless, where there's loss of control, where there's fear of the unknown, and sometimes all those things are happening at the same time, that's part of the grieving process. So, I think it jumped a page. There we go. So what causes grief? I'm going to come on this side. So if you can see, let me know if you can, the loss of a loved one, the death of a close family member, a child, a spouse, a parent, good friend or grandparent, regarding health, chronic illnesses, because these go on year after year, because one loss is piled on top of another as the illness continues, waning health, amputation, the aging process. We can grieve over places, the loss of either physical place, loss of a position or status, the loss of home, church, community, job, reputation. We grieve when there's loss of relationships, of a romantic attachment, separation or divorce, infertility or miscarriage, a child lost in a drug addiction, a loved one lost in severe mental illness. And then there's trauma and abuse, and then natural disasters, terrorism, war, and things that we love, a precious object, items of great sentimental value. As you can see with this list, no one is immune from grieving. Most of us, if not all of us, are going through the grieving process in some way, shape, or form. Some, it's a lot, especially if we lose a loved one or if we have health, that type of grief is a lot harder to process. But in other ways, just little changes, right? I used to wake up, I had my routine. Now I can't do my routine. For some people, is accepting, especially like with routines. I used to be able to do such and such and such prior to the medical procedure that I received, and now I can't. And processing that and accepting that's just normal how we process those type of things. Does anyone have any questions about what I have shared so far?
Is there any one of those that's harder to overcome? I mean, grief is grief.
I would say death and health are probably the hardest ones, because we can't change it and we can't do anything about it. And sometimes, especially if there's death and we just lost a loved one out of nowhere, something happened to them, then that shock, that grief is different than if there was a prolonged illness in that death, because we've been able to process it bit by bit, but the shock sometimes is harder than the other one. So the thing that I have learned as a chaplain is that everyone grieves differently. No one processes grief the same way. I wish everyone processed it the same way, but we don't do that. It all depends on our upbringing, how we handle pain, how we handle emotional pain, if there's previous traumas in our own lives, PTSD that we have, all that comes into play when we're processing grief. Please.
When you said you can't do the same things that you normally do when you get up, process the same
Yes.
movements, I'm going through that too.
Good.
I'm finding that I have to find new things to do in the morning, so that I have some kind of a routine, so there's some kind of normalcy in my life. And I just wondered if that's true to you. Have you discovered new things to do when you get up?
It depends on where you are in the grieving process, but I think you are like coming out of it from what it sounds like and beginning the new normal. That's what I hear you saying. So yes, that is normal. We all begin to adapt, especially if we have medical challenges. So let me share a little bit more about myself. I've had cancer, thyroid cancer twice. No one told me that afterwards it would mess up my GI system and everything in this area. So I have had to learn how to adapt, what medicines to take. Do I do more cardio? Do I drink more liquid? And it's a process, finding ways to be able to cope with the new normal, and that becomes the new routine.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I am starting to feel normal again, even though I'm not doing the same normal things.
Yes.
I'm finding new things to do, and it's becoming, that's my new normal.
Yeah, and I'm glad that, I am thankful that you have the courage to talk about that, because this is hard stuff for some, especially when I'm gonna go to the next slide. On this one, the first thing that sets in when we go through the grieving process is shock and denial. And I love what Diane Langberg says, denial functions like a drug for a broken heart. It allows us to accept the loss bit by bit when we go through those things. So that is just part of the grieving process. I think the error that I see especially, or the things that causes more distress to people when they go through these things, most people are not educated about what the grieving process is. What is normal? What is not normal? A lot of people want to fight or not even talk about the emotions that they're feeling. And a lot of people that I have noticed is they're experts at holding things internally in a vault. And they put their emotions in there. But what most people are not aware of is that the body is very smart and intelligently designed. And what I mean by that is, if someone holds the emotions in their heart, the body has an auto self-defense mechanism that it will find other ways of getting it out. And that can be bitterness, disconnectedness, becoming an introvert, going to drugs, going to alcohol to numb, because the body wants to get the emotions out. So when we go through these processes, shock and denial, they can also manifest as physical manifestations. We can have anxiety, oftentimes manifest in physical ways. Some people feel chest pain, some people can't sleep, there's eating patterns that are disrupted. Also with anger, that is a normal thing that I see in the rooms. A lot of people, some people are extremely angry that this is happening, and that is one way I think it allows people to feel some type of control. It's another way that it allows the body to process this. And all these things, the one thing I want you to get from this, if you see these with patients, with the people that you visit, just know that that is normal. That is actually healthy. To be angry at times, to feel sometimes hopeless, that it's not going to get better. Going through these processes as we change, just for a death hypothetically, to go through one loss takes 2 to 4 years. That is the normal length for grief to resolve. How much more in other areas of our life, if it's multiple family members, if it's health, it takes time to come to accept that this is how it is now. This is my new normal. And I would say that this is the hardest stuff in life, especially when we're dealing with illnesses, because I can't go in there, fix my heart. I can't, I need the pacemaker to live. This is who I am now. The Andrew that didn't have the pacemaker, I'm not that person anymore. That person's gone. My wife, who could eat and who now will never eat, maybe other than a few snacks here and there, she's never gonna be that person. She's never gonna be the person before the hysterectomy. And this is hard stuff because we don't want it to be true. We want to fight against it. So all that is to say is just know that this is normal. This is healthy when we go through these things. Our hearts need to grieve. They were designed to grieve. We're emotional beings. Please feel free to interrupt at any time. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, you got a tough job because you go into that room to talk to these people and you got to analyze all these things and kind of figure out where they're at.
All the chaplains are experts at assessing really listening to what people are saying at that moment and connecting with them and joining them through compassion and empathy and love where they're at, and not trying to fix them, and just loving them for where they're at. And there is very, I think, emotional connection is healing for the heart. A lot of the times, what I wonder if others can relate to this, when my wife was dying on one occasion, and other times she was hospitalized, really the most meaningful things for us was someone just being by our side. They couldn't change it, they couldn't fix it, but that's what we remember, that people would choose to join us where we are at. I think that's another way we exhibit love. And that is what I think why, in my own opinion, not St. Luke's, but my own opinion, is why the country is where it's at with the loneliness epidemic. People don't have those connections. We're relational. We need connection. And since people don't have it when these things happen, it overwhelms them, rightfully so, because this stuff is overwhelming. This stuff is the hardest stuff in life, to deal with these type of changes. So, I will read this, that many people make mistakes about grief and the myths about it. So grieving is the process that occurs in response to some type of death. It is the process that leads to life. So what does she mean that it leads to life? From my experience, what I've seen at this point is grief, taken from her works, but from my own experience, that pain that a person feels when they have pain, when they're grieving, that's actually the heart's way of telling them that they're healing. And most people are not aware of that. That's like, you get a cut, and then that pain that you feel as the body begins to sew itself or recover, that's the heart's way of communicating that. So I love what she says in her writings, that the grief, when you do it, and there's only 3 ways that you can heal from grief, and actually trauma too: time, tears, and talking. That's what allows the human heart to grieve. And I think that's why it takes so much courage to be able to name these things and talk about the things that actually matter, because it gives voice to the truth of what we care about and how important it is to us, and what we care about matters. So the first mistake people make, maybe I'll read it from over here, but my vision's not very good. Yeah, I don't see very well anymore. We often think that grief extends over a period of time, moves in a linear fashion through certain stages, and should be finished in a year. Grieving generally takes considerably longer than a year. I said 2 to 4 years. The phases of grief are many and experienced uniquely, both because individuals' factors, such as personality or history, but also due to the kind of loss experience. So example, losses of a child or of a spouse differ from each other. Death and divorce differ from each other. Loss of a person or a place are different. Trauma and physical death are different. They're all grief, but they impact the person in a different way. So death that was anticipated, number 2, is easier to grieve than the death that was sudden. One is not less challenging than the other. They are simply different types of grief. Each has difficult aspects particular to it. During an extended illness, the person is still with you to some degree, and yet the loss is continual. Each day, as we're with someone that we love, and they begin to change and decline, we're grieving the bit by bit. It's like little by little, we're like eating that little bit at a time. Sudden death has a shock element that is very difficult. Death is final, whether expected or sudden. Number 3, focus on the present. Do not talk about your loss. Keep busy and distract yourself. This is a gigantic mistake. If you do that, you will fail to grieve and you will end up stuck. Some people, they choose not to grieve and they just hold it in. And what tends to happen with them is you can talk to them 5 years later and they're still in the same place they were when they lost a loved one, because they have not allowed their heart to heal. And you can choose to do that, but it comes with its own consequences and outcomes. And what tends to happen, then those people disconnect, and then the family gets worried, and then it just has huge ripples. They go down a path that they don't have to go down, but maybe from upbringing, because for me, in a lot of the rooms I've noticed, depending on the generation that people are born from, they were taught, don't talk about your emotions. Like there's something wrong when, and for an example would be if I'm talking to a Christian and I hear them say that, sometimes in the conversation it will come up, then if that is the case, if we're not supposed to talk about emotions, then why does God have 150 Psalms? All, the 150 Psalms are him showing, I care about what you feel. I want to hear what's going on inside. And that's why I think in the Old Testament there's 50 of them, of those Psalms, that are about grief lament. To show us God's heart that this matters. Especially for me, just speaking as a Christian, that Jesus wept, that he grieved. And that shows me that takes great courage. And if from that tradition, the Son of God, who is one of the creators of the universe, if he is grieving, it's okay for me to grieve. That gives me permission to be human. 4, if you really had faith in God or a higher power, grieving would be short or even unnecessary. Many well-meaning people believe this. Some people I've noticed, and I wonder if each of you have noticed, when we begin to grieve, they tell us to shut it off. Move on, don't worry about it. It's okay. Instead of giving them permission to feel and to cry. When we choose to be with someone, that means that the grieving one sets the pace. So let me give you an example of what that means. There's a story, a real story, of someone at a church who had a spouse die. They go to a funeral. Thank you. They go to a funeral, and someone from the church, after the funeral, I think there was a table, or not a table, but a place to sit. The husband is there, and someone from the church joins him. And all he does is he shares Bible verses. And he says, well, they're in a better place, and all things work together for good, so on and so forth. Now this person leaves. And the gentleman who just lost his spouse is so thankful that this person left. Someone else comes from the church and sits next to him. And he only speaks when this man speaks. And he listens when the man speaks. And after some time, this man leaves. And the man who just lost his spouse says, I wish he didn't leave. I'd like him to be by my side. I didn't want him to leave. Because he actually joined him, which is where we get the word from compassion for. To join others in their suffering. That's actually what the word compassion means. And that is hard stuff. And the reason it is hard to join others in their suffering is because we're reminded of our own mortality. And that's why it's especially for me as a chaplain, I had to come to accept that I too I'm going to die. That my life is short as well. That it brought those things to the surface when I'm in front of someone who is approaching the end of life. I think it's normal to be reminded of the stuff that's going on internally in my own fears, in my own worries, in my own concerns. So that's why I think it's hard for many people to join others in their suffering because they feel very uncomfortable. And I think it is uncomfortable. It's not normal. Number 5, anger expressed in the process of grief should always be shut down. For me, I encourage it. It's okay to be angry. I think I can handle your anger. God can handle your anger. I don't know how many of you have a faith, but from the Judeo-Christian one, I love the story of Job, that instead of running away from God, he draws close to God. And I think that takes tremendous courage to do that. And if you don't have that, and you aren't religious, then having friends that you can be yourself, and be honest with, and be angry with, and they won't try to fix you. That they will let you just be in that space, because it sucks, especially if you lose someone that you love, or you find out you have an illness, or cancer, or it's terminal, whatever it might be. That is hard stuff on the mind. The mind rejects it. It doesn't want it to be true. And to have people just join us where they're at, I think that's some of the most meaningful things we can do for other human beings, to just love them where they're at. And finally, if it will make the someone feel better to be reminded of what they have not lost, or the fact that it could have been worse. And I think we've all heard these. These are the sentences that begin with, "At least she did not," or "They were sick anyways," or "Aren't you glad you still have 3 healthy children?" Or "Aren't you glad," so I won't read that one. It is also thinking about "You did not lose, will alleviate the pain or what you did lose." You are regardless of which one you pick, each person is grieving a real loss, and it hurts their hearts. And that pain is real. We should not be comparing our loss to the good we had, not to the bad that we never happened. Remembering what we have does not fill the empty space. And this is why the grieving process is very important, because that empty space, we want our hearts to heal so it can mend, life can continue, and we can move on to the next chapter and not be stuck in the last chapter. So steps to grief resolution. I'll just highlight these. So the first one is admitting the loss has taken place and that it is final. I think it's very hard for many, and I think it's normal at the same time, to accept this is how things are, and accepting things how they actually are. The heart, so you know from what I've seen, doesn't want to do that. It will fight against that. It does not want to accept that, because that means accepting the pain. And I would say the first point that she says under step 1, accepting the finality of the loss is difficult. The mind rejects this automatically for many people, and it takes time. I wish you could rush it. You can't rush it. And know that in the rooms of the people that you will be visiting, some will be rejecting it. They won't want it to be true. They will fight against that. And mainly what we're doing in these areas is just normalizing. That is normal. There's nothing strange about it. And that helps people know that they're not going crazy internally. Sometimes people begin to not do well because they think that the emotions that they have are not normal. And normalizing and validating and affirming are so powerful. That helps people know they're not alone, that what they're going through is normal. Step 2, experiencing and expressing all the emotions and thoughts that accompany the loss. This is how the heart heals. It needs to get the emotions out of the heart. So people often do things to assist themselves in the process. They look at old photographs, they visit places, they want to talk about their memories, or they write things that they remember and how they feel. I encourage that. Do as much as you can. Do whatever the heart will need at those moments. 3, finding a way to let go and say goodbye. Much of the early aspects of grief involving clinging to what was. As the process moves over time, the clinging is less fierce, and little by little, the griever's hold on what was lost is relinquished. That's how you know you're going through the processes and things are getting better. Obviously, when someone dies, the funeral is part of that process, but it occurs at the very beginning stages and often feels unreal, and as a result. That's why some people sometimes feel they need to do things much later in the process after the heart has healed a little bit. That's why some people delay, because it's too fresh on the heart, the pain is too raw. So step 4, rejoining the world, learning to reinvest the emotional and mental energy consumed by grieving in new relationships, endeavors, people, and projects. And I think this goes back to the question that you asked in the back. That's that step, that's 4. That's the new normal. It occurs toward the end of grieving as we begin little by little to turn to our present life rather than look back towards the past life. So you're coming out of it. That's wonderful that you're doing that. And the final one is complicated grief, and this is when someone is stuck. So I mentioned earlier, some people are experts at holding their emotions in, and they don't want to talk about it. That's when it can become complicated grief. So even 10, 15, 20 years later, the person that lost that loved one is still stuck in that time period. And that's when professionals need to come alongside of that person and help them get out of that area. It could be the wilderness, they're just stuck and they need help. And we all need help at various points in life. You know, sometimes I've heard in the hospital, well, I don't need anybody. I'm fully independent. I've done everything by myself. And sometimes I'll explore with them and go, but you're in the hospital. You have all these medical people helping you. You couldn't help yourself right now. And sometimes we don't think about that stuff, and the light bulb will go off and goes, I guess I am connected. I guess I do need that help. And sometimes we just need people to come alongside and just speak to us and love us where we're at, and encourage us at those moments and instill hope by our presence. So your roles as comforters, because that's what we're doing. You are coming alongside other human beings that are going through stories that many of you have gone through. And this is new, right? The world has changed completely. They don't know what the future holds. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if they can travel. They don't know if they'll be able to do the exercises or eat the food that they had before. And think about that, especially if someone can't eat the food they had before, they'll be grieving over all those restaurants that they used to go to, the relationships at the restaurants that they used to have, hanging out with friends, and if there's alcohol involved and now you can't go drinking, that's a lot of grief. So just think about the surgery or the illness, and then each of those that I mentioned gets piled on top of that, and piled on top of that, and piled on top of that, and no wonder people feel overwhelmed. And no wonder that sometimes people feel hopeless. So, what each of you can do to come alongside of others when a mourner fears they are losing their mind as they cycle through various kinds of grieving, the comforter, that's each of you, can assure them that they are not insane, but this is indeed part of the grieving process. The mourner tells you what they think and feel. You do not teach. You listen, you read her, and you reassure because you understand the nature of grief. Expect anger. As a comforter, you have offered yourself to be present with the griever, giving her an opportunity to express what she feels. Keep in mind that connecting with you, even around anger, is a way of connecting with life when it feels like death has swallowed everything. And I love that, and it really impacted me. So when I am at deaths, and I am at many deaths, I take a great encouragement that in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death that the family has gone down, that I get to be a sign of life in the midst of death. And I think that's what the family members represent. And that has such a tremendous impact when those have been shocked and the whole world has been shaken. The fact that you are privileged to be present means life has been allowed in the place of death. So powerful. You as comforter are the bridge for the mourner. You must compassionately and patiently walk through the valley, visit the villages with the one who grieves. The length of her grieving is determined by her, not by how long you can stand to be sad. Your work is to be with her where she is, not drag her out where you feel comfortable. And what that means is a lot of times people are sharing, patients are sharing, families are sharing, and it's very uncomfortable, and we try to change the subject because we don't like how it makes us feel internally or how we feel internally. And learning to feel comfortable with that. And that is hard work because we have to do some introspection, and we have to see what's going on inside. Good on that, I'm good on that. The length of, comforters are not usually explainers. This point right here. They cannot answer the questions that always arise, do they? Or do they try to? You do not know the purpose or the why. To try to answer such things makes you kin to Job's comforters in the Bible, who were not comforters at all. God was angry with Job's so-called comforters, for in their attempt to explain and answer, they had misrepresented God to the suffering one. The role of the comforter can also be practical. Grief distracts. We get lost in it. We cannot think. Sometimes we neglect our bodies and need gentle reminders to do things for ourselves. This is all normal. Often we forget basic requirements like paying bills, doing wash. Food is a little of interest and may not need to be provided for a while, or it would need to be provided for a while. Loving assistance is often necessary. Anniversaries, holidays, the first time of doing something alone or in a wheelchair, or not being able to do it all needs the same presence of comforters. And the final one, and I think this is the most important one for many of us that do this type of work where we join people. Many fail to take care of their own will, their own self. And what I mean is self-care. They are constantly giving and giving and giving and giving and not spending time recharging and doing the things that bring them life. So for my role as a chaplain, I get 2 days off a week. Saturday is my Sunday, and then Monday is my Sunday. So Saturday is Sunday. The way the job is and how hard it is, because we're constantly joining people where they're at, Saturday I usually feel unwell all day, every week, every year. And most of the staff, from what I have seen, feel the same way. It takes some time for the body to recharge. So I make sure that I cultivate practices that will put me in community, that will allow ritual, that will allow tradition, that will allow laughter, that will allow joy, to allow my being to heal. Because if not, then when I step into patient rooms or with families or with staff, I learned real quickly I'm not the same person, and I'm not there 100%. So self-care is so important, or you can have compassion fatigue. So comforters must take care of themselves. You will need to nurture your own connections in life. You will need to be with others who are neither grieving nor helping the one who is. Remember, you are the comforter, not the griever. Your life must reflect that truth. You will need support. You will need friends who will do fun or silly things that bring laughter. You are being food for the grieving. It is vital to find places and ways to be fed. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope it was helpful for everyone.
Very good.
Thank you. Any questions?
There's a book called, I don't know if I'm gonna give you the exact name, but it's Body Never Forgets.
Yep. Is that required reading here?
No. I'm gonna make it, no. I don't know, I read the first few chapters, and man, it was interesting. These guys that went to Vietnam and came back and just, they were living a horrible life, beating up on their wives and kids and whatever. And boy, that deferred anger was really nasty. So
Yeah.
then it got into the technical how you heal it, and maybe that's my own problem.
Yeah. Well, earlier I mentioned the way that you heal grief is through 3 things: time, talking, and tears. Trauma heals the same way.
So the PTSD that he's mentioning.
Talking about it. And for many, from what I have seen, they hold it in because they might have moral injury and they feel shameful to talk about it, instead of someone coming alongside of him and helping him get that stuff out, go through the pain. And what most people don't, what I have learned is you can hold it in, but then you're suffering all the time, mentally, emotionally, relationally, communally, psychologically. It affects us holistically. The other option is getting it out. You feel that pain, but then you get healing at the end. So
That's the only way you're gonna get it to, right?
yeah, and the heart needs that, and your family needs that too, right? Because we think, well, I'll hold it in and I'll be fine. And then now, what, our wife hears us angry or snapping at her, or vice versa, right? It's gonna come out some way, and they don't deserve that. But it's very hard. We think that it's something wrong with us that we feel these things inside. Please.
I visit with patients, heart patients, and I don't know that I could do a comforter role, only because I lost my wife of 32 years, lost her 24 years ago, and I still grieve that loss. That's not something that I expect will ever go away. But your presentation is very good, but I'm afraid that I've been compromised somewhat with my own experience through that. And I've gone through, I accept, of the loss and all that. I've gone through all the steps of grieving, and I've moved on. But she will always occupy a part of my life, a part of my heart, and it's something that I'll never recover from completely. And, but I'm afraid that I may, as a comforter, convey some of that emotion in that process. So I'm not sure I would be a very good comforter. I'm a good listener, and I can listen and console that way, but as far as, I'm afraid I might end up sharing some of my own experiences in that loss. I mean, she died of a heart attack and survived for 3 weeks after the heart attack before she died. But that was horrible.
Yeah.
Totally, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But, so I would have to, to do that, I would have to kind of pick through some of those points as opposed to figure out which ones I could actually apply versus the ones I maybe would be better off skipping past those. Fortunately, I've been, I've been visiting patients for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, and I have yet to come across a patient that is terminally ill. So that's, and it's kind of on the plus side of all of this that I'm saying, so.
Well, I would just encourage you, I love how good your self-awareness is. I think it's normal when we're in those rooms where our own stories are coming and we want to project them onto the patient in however way we see them. So for us as chaplains on our side, we've been trained, at least we've been trained where if I get those thoughts, I just put it on a shelf in my mind and leave it there and listen. And I think listening is one of the most powerful things we can do as comforters. And the other thing I would say to encourage you is remember how you felt during that time, going through that. If you can just pinpoint some of the emotions, then when someone talks, you'll exactly hear those things that they're saying, and you can use that to connect with them. Yeah, and that's how we can join others. So a lot of the times, I think it's very helpful. People feel alone in those experiences, and just knowing if we disclose a little bit, this has been my experience, and I went through that too. Right. What it allows us to do, if we choose to do it, is they're here. I'm on this side of the bridge. They're on that side. A little bit of sharing will allow us to cross right where they're at. Almost like when an addict knows that someone else went through the addiction and recovered, that there's some solidarity there that without it, you can't have that connection. So just stuff to think about and reflect about, because yeah, I'm so grateful that you shared all that stuff. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I would just say, I think, you mentioned that feeling pain is that's when you start to heal, is when you feel that pain. And I think we've all felt pain, or whatever X might be. And so that connection that you're human and you have felt pain like the person you're talking to is feeling pain doesn't need to be a long explanation of why you feel pain. But I think as a society, we are so pain averse. We don't want, everybody tells us you shouldn't feel pain, you should feel great all the time, and that's not true. And so just acknowledging that, this person you're talking to is feeling pain. To me, having been in the hospital, it would have been great had somebody shared that with me at the time that I was feeling those things.
Yes, I agree. I would love to have a visit from you. I think, to your point, just knowing that they're not alone.
It's kind of like what they talk about in our training is not to focus on yourself to say, oh, I know exactly what you're feeling or what you're going through. And yeah, when you visit these people, it does bring up your own experience a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe if you can use that to, like as your point was, to kind of pinpoint what that person is feeling at that time. You can be a little bit more empathetic and say, I felt so scared make them feel like it's okay to say, I'm scared too. Or, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what life is gonna hold. Maybe those become, we can't solve their issue, we just can't. But we can at least say, you're not the first one to walk through this. And as a group, we would like to be able to share that ability to walk through it with someone else.
And it's very powerful, especially if you hear those things and they're struggling with those things. It's normal what you're feeling. It's part of the process. And that is very comforting for most people from what I've seen. Yeah.
I would say too, that now that we have been here and listened to your talk, if it feels uncomfortable, that maybe that's the place where we say, you might benefit with a visit from the chaplain. Would that be something that you'd be interested in? And that could be a follow-up that we don't have the opportunity, the training or the opportunity to do. So I'm so glad that you came and spoke.
You were so welcome. And I love what you shared because that's how I view the hospital. There's doctors and there's nurses and cafeteria staff, and I picture the hospital like an organism. And I have my part in it. I might be a finger, and then there's someone that's the heart and someone that's the brain, and you're all part of that journey as well. Joining them where they're at. And in a sense, what I heard you say, do a handoff if they might benefit from that support. And that same would go for me. If I hear they need a social worker, or I hear that they might benefit from talking to the nurse, I'll do that. Because I'm not a nurse, and I'm not a doctor. I'm just there. I've been gifted with certain things in my calling, and I want all of us working together, because it's hard being in the hospital. It is hard living in that place. It's a different language. You don't know what the future holds. You don't know if you're going to get better some of the times. Everything is brand new. Like you're going to a foreign country and you got to learn a brand new language with brand new rules. It's a whole change of life. So I am grateful that you shared that. And please, Pat.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, from the other side, from the caregiver's perspective too, that's very, very hard to find that time, that me time, that downtime to relax, to rest and refresh.
Yep.
I mean, I've just gone through an experience, and we just lost a friend on Monday, and I've been taking care of him for months, and then his wife before that, and so I have been on this kind of high, adrenaline high for a year, almost a year. And I woke up Tuesday morning and I thought, I gotta get up, gotta do this, and then I thought, wait, stop, you don't have to now. You know, you can let go, but it's so hard. I think that is, and all the way through this process, people will find those 2 minutes to refresh. I just didn't do a good job of it, you know, I was pretty frazzled by the time he passed, so anyway, it's, when you said it's, you mentioned how difficult it is and the way it is, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done.
I'm glad that you shared that. So let me share a little bit about, just a little bit more about my first day off. I go to church, and this is, most people laugh at this. The pastor already knows, and I'm going to sleep at church. I can't stay awake anymore. I am so tired. I've gone to church after being on call all night, but I do that because I want to be part of community. I want to worship the best that I can because it actually helps me as a human being. I need that. But my body's screaming, don't do this. Disconnect and be alone. And that comes with its own consequences. So this stuff takes a lot of wisdom. And sometimes, I would say most of the time, a large portion of the time, my body's like, please don't do what you're doing. But I need to do it. My wife needs me there. I need to see others at church. I need to be refreshed by those relationships and those conversations, and vice versa. And then I also do some other things for my own well-being to help me process what I go through. And most of the time, I don't want to do that. It's interesting. Most of the things that are good for me, my body doesn't want to do them. I think that's normal. Even more so when we go through these seasons. So, but thank you for everyone's time. I am so grateful that you came.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.